It was a stormy night on the remote research station, and Dr. Ethan Grant was alone, as usual. The distant stars outside the window seemed cold and unfeeling, their light barely reaching the desolate corner of space where Ethan had chosen to work. The hum of the station's systems was the only sound, a constant reminder of how isolated he was. Ethan sat in his small lab, reviewing data on his holoscreen. The results were the same as always. Inconclusive. Frustrated, he leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. It had been months since he'd seen another person, and the loneliness was starting to weigh on him. Then, a sound broke through the silence. A knock, faint at first, then louder. Ethan froze. No one should be here. The station was far from any major routes, and visitors were unheard of. His heart began to race. Was it a malfunction? A piece of debris? Or something else? The knock came again, more insistent this time. Swallowing his fear, Ethan grabbed the station's emergency tool, a heavy metal rod, and moved toward the airlock. The cameras showed nothing unusual, just the empty hallway leading to the outer door. But someone, or something, was out there. "Who's there?" Ethan called out, his voice shaky. No response, just silence. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the button to open the airlock. The door hissed and slid open, revealing a figure standing in the threshold. It was a woman, or at least she looked like one. Her long, silvery hair shimmered in the dim light, and her skin had an unnatural glow, almost like it was illuminated from within. Her eyes were the most striking feature, violet, deep, and endless, as if they held the secrets of the universe. She stepped inside, her movements graceful yet deliberate. Ethan tightened his grip on the metal rod. "Who are you? How did you get here?" he demanded. The woman tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Then she spoke, her voice soft but commanding. "My name is Kayla," she said. "I've come for you, Dr. Grant." "For me?" Ethan asked, confused and wary. "Why?" Kayla's gaze didn't waver. "Because you're the only one who can help me. And if you don't, you'll regret it forever." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. There was something in her tone, something final, like a warning. He took a step back, trying to put some distance between them. "I don't know who you are or what you want," he said, his voice firm. "But you can't just show up here and—" Kayla interrupted him. "I had no choice. You're the only one who can bond with me." "Bond?" Ethan repeated, now more confused than ever. "What are you talking about?" Kayla didn't answer immediately. Instead, she raised her hand and reached toward him. Before Ethan could react, her fingers brushed against his, and a strange warmth spread through his body. He looked down and saw a faint glow on the back of his hand, a mark, intricate and otherworldly, appearing where her touch had been. What did you do to me?" Ethan demanded, his voice rising. He tried to rub the mark away, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if it had become part of his skin. Kayla stepped closer, her violet eyes now filled with something that looked like desperation. "I marked you. It's a connection, a bond. It's the only way we can survive." "Survive what?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. "What are you even talking about?" Kayla hesitated, as if she were deciding how much to tell him. "There are forces out there," she said finally, "that you cannot begin to understand. Forces that will destroy everything if we don't act. The bond between us is the only thing that can stop them." Ethan shook his head. "This is insane. I don't even know you. You can't just show up here, say a few cryptic things, and expect me to trust you." Kayla's expression softened, but her voice remained firm. "I didn't choose you lightly, Dr. Grant. You were chosen because you have the strength to endure what's coming. But you must accept the bond. If you refuse, it won't just be me who suffers. It will be you too." Ethan's mind raced. Was she some kind of alien? A trick of his imagination? And what was this bond she kept talking about? He wanted answers, But before he could ask, the station's lights flickered. A low, rumbling sound echoed through the walls. Kayla's eyes widened. "They're here," she whispered. "Who's here?" Ethan asked, fear creeping into his voice. "The ones who want to destroy us," Kayla said. "You have to trust me, Ethan. Please." Before he could respond, the station's alarm blared, signaling an approaching object. Ethan rushed to the console, his hands trembling as he brought up the external cameras. What he saw made his blood run cold. A massive dark ship was approaching the station, its jagged design unlike anything he'd ever seen before. It radiated menace, as if its very presence was a threat. Ethan turned to Kayla, his voice barely more than a whisper. "What have you brought here?" Kayla met his gaze, her expression grim. "Your future," she said. "And your choice." The episode ended with a loud crash as the enemy ship docked with the station, leaving Ethan to face an impossible decision. The mark of fate. Ethan stared at the glowing mark on his hand, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. It was intricate, like a living tattoo, pulsing faintly with an inner light. No matter how much he tried to rub it away or analyze it, the mark remained, as if fused with his very being. Kayla stood across the room, her violet eyes fixed on him. She looked almost as shocked as he felt, though her expression held something else. Hope, fear, maybe even regret. "You need to explain this," Ethan said, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and confusion. "What did you do to me? What is this mark?" Kayla took a step closer, her silver hair catching the dim light of the lab. "That mark," she began, her tone softer now, "is the bond between us. It's ancient, older than your species, older than your understanding of the universe. My people call it the mark of fate." Ethan let out a humorless laugh. "Mark of fate? Sounds like something out of a bad sci-fi holodrama. I didn't agree to this. You can't just do this to someone." Kayla's expression hardened. "I didn't choose this lightly, Ethan. I chose you because I had no other choice. Time is running out. For me, for you, for everything." "What does that even mean?" Ethan snapped, slamming his hand on the console. "You keep talking in riddles. If you want my help, then tell me the truth." Kayla hesitated, as if weighing whether to reveal what she knew. Finally, she spoke, her voice heavy with the weight of her words. "My people are dying, Ethan. We are being hunted, erased from existence by a species that feeds on our very essence. They call themselves the Devourers." "Devourers?" Ethan asked, skeptical. "And what does that have to do with me?" Kayla gestured to his hand. "That mark binds us, Ethan. It's a connection that amplifies our strength, our emotions, our power. Alone, I cannot fight them. But with you, with our bond, we might stand a chance." Ethan frowned, his scientific mind struggling to process what she was saying. "So, what? You're some kind of alien warrior, and I'm supposed to be your sidekick? That's ridiculous." Kayla's eyes flashed with frustration. "This isn't a joke, Ethan. The Devourers are coming for us. That mark means you're already involved, whether you like it or not. If you reject the bond, it will consume you from the inside out." Ethan froze. "Consume me? What are you talking about?" Kayla sighed and sat down on the edge of the console, her shoulders slumping. For the first time, she looked vulnerable, almost human. "The bond isn't just a connection, Ethan. It's a living thing. It ties our fates together. If you fight it, it will destroy you. And me." Ethan rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of her words pressing down on him. This was too much. Just hours ago, his biggest concern had been analyzing data on asteroid formations. Now, he was apparently bonded to an alien and facing some kind of intergalactic threat. As if sensing his doubt, Kayla softened her tone. "I know this is overwhelming. I didn't want to bring you into this, but I had no choice. You're different, Ethan. Your mind, your resilience, it's rare. You're stronger than you think." Ethan shook his head. "I'm just a scientist. I'm not a hero, or whatever you think I am. Kayla smiled faintly. Sometimes, heroes are made, not born. Before Ethan could respond, the station's alarm blared again. The external cameras showed the dark, jagged ship looming closer, its ominous shape filling the screen. A deep, resonating hum echoed through the station, vibrating the walls. Kayla's eyes widened. They found us. Ethan's heart raced. Who? The Devourers. Kayla nodded, her face grim. They won't stop until we're dead. They can sense the bond. It's like a beacon to them. Ethan turned back to the console, his hands flying across the controls. The station doesn't have enough firepower to hold them off. We need to do something. Kayla stepped beside him, her presence oddly calming despite the chaos. The bond gives us more than just power. It gives us a connection, a shared strength. If you let it in, we can fight them together. Ethan hesitated, his mind warring with itself. Trusting her felt insane. But what choice did he have? The ship outside was a nightmare come to life, and he had no other options. Fine, he said, turning to her. What do I need to do? Kayla placed her hand over the mark on his. The glow intensified, spreading up his arm like golden threads weaving through his veins. A sudden rush of warmth flooded his body, and for a moment, he felt as if he could see through Kayla's eyes. Her memories, her fears, her determination. It's only the beginning, she said softly. But now we stand a chance. The station shuddered as the enemy ship began to dock. Ethan looked at Kayla, a mixture of fear and resolve in his eyes. What happens if we fail? He asked. Kayla's answer was simple, yet chilling. Then they'll take everything. Your world, your life, and your very soul. The sound of metal screeching filled the air as the docking clamps locked in place. Ethan gripped the console, his heart pounding. He wasn't ready for this, but ready or not, the fight had begun. The galactic truth. The station trembled as the enemy ship docked, its claws locking into the airlock with a final bone-chilling screech. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He turned to Kayla, whose violet eyes glowed faintly in the dim light of the lab. Tell me the truth, Ethan said, his voice low but urgent. No more half-answers, no more riddles. What are we really up against? Kayla hesitated, her expression a mix of guilt and determination. She placed a hand on the console, activating a small holographic projection. It flickered to life, showing a vast, starless void, a black expanse dotted with faint lights that seemed to flicker and die out. This is what we're fighting, Kayla said. Her voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of sorrow. Ethan squinted at the image. It's nothing. Just darkness. Kayla's gaze hardened. Exactly. The Devourers aren't just a species. They're a force. They feed on life, on energy, on everything that makes a civilization thrive. When they finish with a world, all that's left is emptiness. No light, no sound, just void. Ethan stared at the projection, his stomach twisting. And you're saying they're here? Now. Kayla nodded. They've been tracking me for weeks. I was sent to find help, to form a bond strong enough to fight them. Without it, I'm powerless. Ethan gestured to the glowing mark on his hand. So this bond, you're saying it's the only thing keeping us alive? It's more than that, Kayla replied. The bond is our weapon. Alone, I have the strength of my people, but it's incomplete. With you, the bond amplifies that strength. It turns our connection into something the Devourers can't consume. Ethan leaned against the console, trying to process everything. His logical mind rebelled against the absurdity of it all. Aliens, Devourers, bonds, but the evidence was right in front of him. The mark on his hand burned softly, a constant reminder of how real this was. And what happens to me? He asked finally. If I agree to this bond, what does it mean for me? Kayla looked away, her expression unreadable. The bond isn't easy. It connects us on every level. Mind, body, soul. You'll feel my pain, my fears, my memories. It's overwhelming at first, but it's also the only way. Ethan frowned. You're asking me to sacrifice everything. My freedom, my sanity, maybe even my life. Why should I trust you? Kayla stepped closer, her voice softening. Because I didn't come here to take from you, Ethan. I came here because I believe in you. You're not like the others I've encountered. You have a strength they don't, a resilience, a determination. You're capable of so much more than you realize. Ethan searched her face for any hint of deception. He saw none. Instead, he saw something that surprised him. Vulnerability. For all her talk of strength and power, Kayla looked afraid. Before he could respond, a deep guttural sound echoed through the station. It was low and resonant, like the growl of some enormous beast. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. They're breaching the airlock, Kayla said, her voice tense. We don't have much time. Ethan turned to the console, bringing up the security feed. The image was grainy, but he could make out dark, amorphous shapes moving through the docking corridor. They didn't walk so much as flow, their bodies shifting and writhing like living shadows. What are those? Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. They're scouts, Kayla said. They'll tear through this station in minutes if we don't stop them. Ethan's hands trembled as he activated the station's limited defenses. Turrets whirred to life, aiming at the intruders. He pressed the firing button, and beams of energy shot down the corridor. The creatures recoiled, but instead of falling, they split apart, each piece reforming into a smaller version of itself. Ethan watched in horror as the number of creatures doubled. It's not working, he said, panic rising in his voice. They're adapting. Kayla placed a hand on his shoulder. That's why we need the bond. My energy, combined with yours, can stop them. But you have to let me in. Ethan turned to her, fear and doubt clouding his mind. He wanted to say no, to push her away and pretend this wasn't happening. But the creatures were coming, and the station was shaking under their assault. If he didn't act now, there wouldn't be a later. Fine, he said, his voice trembling. Do it. Kayla nodded and raised her hands, placing them on either side of his head. The mark on his hand flared brightly, and a surge of energy shot through him. It was unlike anything he'd ever felt, warm and cold, light and dark, all at once. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he thought he might lose consciousness. Then he saw it. Kayla's memories, her world, vibrant and full of life, now reduced to ash by the devourers. Her people, once strong and proud, now scattered and broken. Her fear, her determination, her hope, all of it poured into him, overwhelming and undeniable. When the connection stabilized, Ethan opened his eyes. The mark on his hand was no longer faint. It blazed like a star. He felt stronger, more aware, as if the bond had awakened something dormant within him. They're here, Kayla said, her voice steady now. Are you ready? Ethan clenched his fists, the energy of the bond coursing through him. For the first time, he felt like he might stand a chance. Let's do this, he said. The creatures reached the door, their shadowy forms seeping through the cracks. Ethan and Kayla stood side by side, their bond glowing brightly, ready to face the darkness together. Love as a weapon. The station was in chaos. Alarms blared, the lights flickered, and the walls trembled as the shadowy creatures advanced. They moved with an eerie grace, flowing through the corridors like liquid darkness, consuming everything in their path. Ethan could feel the weight of the bond now, a strange but undeniable presence in his mind. It wasn't just Kayla's energy. It was her emotions, her memories, and her fears, all tangled with his own. They're inside, Ethan said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. How do we stop them? Kayla stood beside him, her glowing violet eyes scanning the monitors. The bond gives us strength, but it's not just physical, Ethan. It's emotional. They feed on fear, on doubt. If you let those feelings consume you, they'll grow stronger. Ethan stared at her. You're saying I just have to stay calm. That's impossible. Look at them. He pointed to the screen, where the creatures were melting through a bulkhead as if it were made of wax. Kayla turned to him, placing a hand on his chest. Her touch was warm, grounding. It's not about staying calm. It's about focus. The bond amplifies our feelings. If we focus on strength, on hope, we can turn it into a weapon. But if you give in to fear, they'll use it against us. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady his mind. The bond formed between them, like a heartbeat that wasn't his own. He could feel Kayla's presence, a steady flame burning beside the chaos in his thoughts. He nodded. All right, what do we do? Kayla gestured to the central console. The station's reactor can channel the energy from our bond, but only if we work together. It's dangerous. If we're not in sync, the energy could overload and destroy the station. Ethan frowned. And if we are in sync? Kayla's expression softened. Then it will create a pulse strong enough to destroy the devourers. At least, the ones here. Ethan hesitated, his mind racing. The creatures were getting closer and time was running out. What do you mean, the ones here? How many are there? Kayla's voice was quiet. The ones you see are just scouts. The real threat is their hive mind. It's out there, somewhere in the void, controlling them. This pulse won't destroy it, but it will buy us time. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. So this is just the beginning. Kayla nodded. It always is. Before he could respond, the lights flickered again, and a cold, suffocating presence filled the air. The creatures had reached the control room door, their dark forms pressed against the reinforced glass, their formless shapes shifting and writhing like smoke caught in a storm. They're here, Kayla said, her voice steady. She extended her hand to Ethan. Do you trust me? Ethan looked at her, his mind a whirlwind of doubt and fear. But beneath it all, he felt something else. Determination. He didn't fully understand the bond or what it meant, but he knew one thing. Without Kayla, he wouldn't stand a chance. He took her hand. I trust you. The moment their hands touched, the mark on Ethan's hand flared to life, its light spreading up his arm like molten gold. The glow spread to Kayla, enveloping them both in a warm, radiant aura. Ethan gasped as a surge of energy flowed through him, stronger than anything he'd ever felt. He could see it now. Kayla's memories, her world, her people. He saw towering crystal cities bathed in eternal sunlight, now reduced to ash and ruin. He felt her pain, her loss, her hope. And in return, she felt his, the loneliness of his isolated life. The drive to understand the universe, the small spark of courage he didn't know he had. We're connected now, Kayla said, her voice resonating in his mind, as much as in the room. Focus on that. On us. They can't break what we've built. The creatures smashed through the glass, pouring into the room like a living tide. Ethan felt a wave of fear rise in his chest, but Kayla squeezed his hand, grounding him. Together, they raised their free hands, and the bond between them flared. A pulse of light erupted from their bodies, slamming into the creatures. They recoiled, their dark forms writhing in agony as the light burned through them. Ethan could feel the energy draining him, but he held on, channeling every ounce of strength he had into the bond. Don't stop, Kayla shouted. We're almost there. The creatures pressed forward, their shadowy forms struggling against the light. Ethan gritted his teeth, pushing back with everything he had. He could feel the bond straining, the reactor humming with power as it amplified their energy. With a final burst of light, the pulse exploded outward, washing over the station. The creatures let out a terrible, inhuman scream before dissolving into nothingness. The room fell silent, the air heavy with the lingering warmth of the energy they had unleashed. Ethan collapsed to his knees, breathing hard. The mark on his hand dimmed, its glow fading to a soft ember. He looked up at Kayla, who was leaning against the console, her face pale but determined. "Is it over?" he asked. Kayla shook her head. "For now. But they'll come back. They always do." Ethan stared at her, his chest tightening. "Then what's the point? If we can't stop them." "We can," Kayla interrupted. "This was just the first step. The bond is stronger now, but it's not enough. We have to find the hive mind. We have to end this at the source." Ethan nodded slowly, his exhaustion giving way to a grim resolve. "Then we'll do it, together." Kayla smiled faintly, her violet eyes meeting his. Together. As the station's systems rebooted and the lights stabilized, Ethan knew his life would never be the same. The fight wasn't over. It was only beginning. The bond is forged. The aftermath of the battle left the station in a fragile silence, broken only by the hum of its struggling systems. Sparks flew from damaged consoles, and the faint scent of burning wires filled the air. Ethan sat slumped on the floor, his back against the wall, his chest heaving with exhaustion. The glowing mark on his hand, once blinding in its intensity, now pulsed faintly, a quiet reminder of what had just happened. Kayla knelt beside him, her expression unreadable. "You did well," she said softly, her voice carrying both relief and concern. Ethan let out a dry laugh. "I don't feel like I did. I feel like I've been hit by a starship." Kayla smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed her fatigue. "The bond takes a toll, especially the first time." He turned to her, his brow furrowing. "Speaking of that, what exactly is this bond doing to me? I don't feel like myself anymore. I feel different." Kayla hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "The bond doesn't just connect us, Ethan. It changes us. My people call it the merge. It's the blending of two souls into something greater. You're no longer just human, and I'm no longer just me. Together, we're something else." Ethan stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "Something else. That's not exactly comforting, Kayla. You're saying I'm not even human anymore." "You're still human," Kayla assured him. "But you're also more than that. The bond amplifies everything. Your emotions, your instincts, your strength. You've felt it, haven't you? The clarity, the energy." Ethan thought back to the battle. The surge of power, the way he and Kayla had moved in perfect sync, as if they were two halves of the same being. It had been exhilarating and terrifying. "I don't know if I like this," he admitted. "I didn't ask for any of it." Kayla's expression softened. "I know, and I'm sorry. But if I had a choice, I wouldn't have brought you into this. I wouldn't have marked you. But the Devourers forced my hand. If we don't stand together, there's no hope for either of us." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "So what now? Do we just sit here and wait for them to come back?" Kayla shook her head. "No, the bond is only the beginning. If we're going to survive, we need to strengthen it. Right now, it's unstable. The next time the Devourers attack, it might not be enough." "How do we strengthen it?" Ethan asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know. Kayla stood and walked over to the central console. With a wave of her hand, she brought up a holographic star map. Dozens of glowing points lit up the display, each one representing a system consumed by the Devourers. "We have to go to my homeworld," she said. "It's the only place where the bond can fully form." Ethan stood, his legs shaky but steady enough to carry him. "Your homeworld? You mean the one that's been destroyed?" Kayla nodded. "What's left of it, yes. The Devourers attacked it first, but they didn't destroy everything. There's a temple, ancient, older than my people. It's where the first bonds were forged. If we can get there, the bond will stabilize, and we'll have the strength to fight back." Ethan frowned, staring at the map. "And what happens if we don't get there?" Kayla's voice was quiet. "Then the bond will collapse, and when it does, so will we." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Ethan rubbed his temples, trying to process everything. It felt like he was being dragged deeper and deeper into a nightmare with no way out. But as much as he wanted to run, to leave Kayla and her problems behind, he couldn't shake the memory of the creatures, the devourers. They weren't just her problem. They were everyone's. "How far is it?" he asked finally. Kayla smiled, a faint flicker of hope lighting her features. "Far, but the stationed ship should get us there." Ethan's heart sank. "The ship? You mean that rust bucket in the hangar? I haven't flown it in years." "You'll remember," Kayla said, her confidence unwavering. "And if not, I'll help you. The bond will guide us." Ethan wasn't sure if that was reassuring or terrifying. But before he could respond, a deep rumble shook the station. The lights flickered and the alarms blared again. "They're back," Kayla said, her voice tense. Ethan's stomach twisted. "Already?" Kayla nodded. "They won't stop until they've consumed the bond. We need to leave. Now." Ethan hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "All right, let's go." Together, they raced to the hangar, the station shaking around them. The ship was a small battered craft, barely big enough for two people. Its hull was covered in scorch marks, and one of its engines sputtered weakly as they approached. "This doesn't exactly inspire confidence," Ethan muttered. Kayla gave him a pointed look. "It'll fly. That's all that matters." As they boarded the ship, the airlock door burst open, and the devourers poured into the hangar. Ethan felt the bond flare, Kayla's fear mixing with his own. But there was something else, too: determination, strength. Together, they activated the ship's engines, the roar drowning out the sound of the creatures. The ship lifted off, its thrusters struggling but managing to propel them into space. As the station grew smaller behind them, Ethan glanced at Kayla. Her eyes were fixed on the stars ahead, her expression unreadable. "This bond of ours," he said, breaking the silence. "It's going to get us killed, isn't it?" Kayla turned to him, a small smile playing on her lips. "Not if we make it to my homeworld, and not if we fight together." Ethan leaned back in his seat, the weight of the galaxy pressing down on him. He didn't know what awaited them, but one thing was certain: there was no turning back. The price of love. The stars stretched into brilliant streaks of light as the ship entered hyperspace, leaving the wreckage of the station and the devourers far behind. The hum of the engines filled the silence between them, a stark contrast to the chaos they'd just escaped. Ethan sat in the pilot's chair, gripping the controls tighter than necessary, his mind racing with questions. Kayla sat in the co-pilot's seat, her violet eyes fixed on the star map projected before her. The faint glow of the mark on her hand pulsed in rhythm with the one on Ethan's, a quiet reminder of their fragile connection. "How long until we reach your homeworld?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence. 3 standard days," Kayla replied without looking at him. Her voice was calm, but there was a tension beneath it, like a string pulled too tight. Ethan leaned back, letting out a long breath. 3 days, plenty of time to process the fact that I'm bonded to an alien and being hunted by intergalactic nightmares. Kayla glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You're handling it better than most would." "That's not saying much," Ethan muttered. He turned his chair to face her. "All right, Kayla. No more half-truths. If this bond is supposed to make us stronger, why do I feel like it's tearing me apart?" Kayla hesitated, her gaze dropping to the glowing mark on her hand. "The bond isn't just a connection, Ethan. It's a merging. Our thoughts, emotions, even our instincts, they're becoming one. But that process is difficult, especially for someone untrained." Ethan frowned. "Untrained? What does that mean?" Kayla sighed. "In my culture, bonding is a sacred act, something prepared for over years, sometimes decades. The mind and body must be conditioned to handle the merge. But you," she looked at him, her expression softening, "you were thrown into it. You weren't ready." "Great," Ethan said, rubbing his temples. "So what happens if I can't handle it?" Do I just burn out? Kayla's silence was answer enough. Ethan stared at her, his chest tightening. You knew this might kill me, didn't you? Kayla met his gaze, her eyes filled with guilt. I didn't have a choice, Ethan. The devourers were closing in. If I hadn't bonded with you, we'd both be dead by now. And now I might die anyway, Ethan said bitterly. He stood, pacing the cramped cockpit. This just keeps getting better. Kayla stood as well, her movements graceful but deliberate. I didn't want this for you, but you're stronger than you think. The bond chose you for a reason. Ethan stopped pacing, turning to face her. What reason? I'm not a soldier, Kayla. I'm a scientist. I spend my days analyzing asteroid data, not fighting intergalactic wars. Kayla stepped closer, her violet eyes locking onto his. The bond doesn't care about what you do, Ethan. It cares about who you are. You have a strength inside you, something rare, something powerful. That's why I chose you. That's why the bond chose you. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but a sudden wave of pain shot through his body, cutting him off. He staggered, clutching his chest as the mark on his hand flared brightly. His knees buckled, and he collapsed to the floor. Ethan. Kayla dropped to her knees beside him, her hands glowing as she pressed them to his chest. It's the bond. It's unstable. What's happening to me? Ethan gasped, his vision blurring. Kayla closed her eyes, focusing her energy. The merge is accelerating. Your mind is fighting it, trying to hold on to its individuality. You need to let go, Ethan. Trust me. I don't know how, Ethan whispered, his voice weak. Kayla placed her forehead against his, their marks aligning. Focus on me. On the connection. Feel it. Don't fight it. Ethan tried to do as she said, but the pain was overwhelming. His thoughts spiraled out of control, memories blending with Kayla's. His childhood on Earth, her training on her homeworld, his loneliness in the station, her fear of the devourers. It was too much. I can't. He choked out. Yes, you can, Kayla said firmly. You're stronger than this, Ethan. I believe in you. Her words cut through the chaos like a beacon. Ethan latched onto them, focusing on the bond between them. Slowly, the pain began to subside, replaced by a strange warmth. The glowing mark on his hand dimmed, settling into a steady rhythm. Ethan opened his eyes, meeting Kayla's gaze. What just happened? Kayla smiled, though her expression was tinged with exhaustion. You took the first step. The merge is stabilizing, but it's not complete. There's still work to do. Ethan sat up, his body trembling. And if I don't finish it, then the bond will destroy us both, Kayla said bluntly. She offered him a hand, pulling him to his feet. But I know you'll finish it, Ethan, because you're stronger than you realize. He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. What's the next step? Kayla turned to the star map, her expression hardening. We reach the temple. Once we're there, the merge will complete, and we'll have the strength to fight the devourers. Until then, we stay alive. Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. Then let's do it. As the ship sped toward Kayla's homeworld, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest challenges were still ahead. But for the first time, he felt something he hadn't in years. Purpose. A love that defies stars. The ship broke through the dense, glowing nebula surrounding Kayla's homeworld, revealing a planet bathed in the eerie light of a dying sun. Vast scars crisscrossed its surface, remnants of battles fought long ago. The once glistening cities of Kayla's people now lay in ruins, their crystal towers shattered and blackened. The planet was silent, its surface a graveyard of her civilization. Ethan stared out the viewport, his stomach tightening. This is where we're supposed to fix the bond. This place looks like it's barely holding together. Kayla sat in the co-pilot's seat, her expression unreadable. The temple still stands. It's shielded, hidden deep within the mountains. The devourers couldn't reach it, no matter how hard they tried. Ethan shook his head. Why is it so important? What makes this temple the key? Kayla glanced at him, her violet eyes shimmering. It's the source of our strength. It's where the first bonds were forged, where the energy of the universe was first channeled into something tangible. It's the only place where the bond can reach its full potential. And what happens if we don't make it in time? Ethan asked, his voice quiet. Kayla hesitated, then looked back at the planet. Then the bond collapses, and the devourers win. Not just here, but everywhere. Ethan swallowed hard, gripping the controls as they descended toward the surface. The ship shuddered as they passed through the atmosphere, turbulence shaking its already fragile structure. The glowing mountains came into view, their jagged peaks piercing the sky like ancient blades. At their base lay the temple, a sprawling structure carved into the rock, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. But something was wrong. "They're already here," Kayla said, her voice tense. She pointed to the horizon, where dark, amorphous shapes moved like a living tide, surrounding the temple. Ethan's heart sank. "How? I thought you said they couldn't reach it." "They couldn't," Kayla said, her tone grim. "Not until we activated the bond. The energy led them here." Ethan stared at the creatures, their shadowy forms writhing and twisting, feeding off the desolation around them. "So this is my fault?" "No," Kayla said firmly. "It's mine. I brought you into this, but now we have to finish it." The ship landed on a narrow plateau near the temple, its engines sputtering as they powered down. Ethan grabbed a small pack of supplies, his hand trembling as he adjusted the strap. Kayla placed a hand on his arm, her touch steadying him. "We can do this, Ethan. The bond is strong enough. We just have to believe in it, and in each other." Ethan nodded, though doubt gnawed at the edges of his resolve. "All right, let's finish this." The descent into the temple. The entrance to the temple loomed before them, its massive doors etched with glowing symbols that pulsed faintly in time with the marks on their hands. As they approached, the bond between them seemed to hum, a low vibration that resonated in Ethan's chest. Kayla pressed her hand against the door, and the symbols flared to life, casting the cavern in a warm golden light. The doors groaned as they swung open, revealing a vast chamber lined with crystalline structures that seemed to pulse with energy. "This is it," Kayla said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The heart of the bond." Ethan followed her inside, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. The chamber felt alive, its energy pressing against him like a living thing. At its center stood a platform, its surface engraved with intricate patterns that glowed faintly. "What do we do?" Ethan asked. Kayla stepped onto the platform, motioning for him to follow. "We complete the merge. Stand with me." Ethan hesitated, then joined her. As soon as he stepped onto the platform, the bond flared, the marks on their hands blazing with light. Ethan gasped as a surge of energy coursed through him, overwhelming and all-encompassing. He could feel Kayla's presence in his mind, stronger than ever. Her emotions, her memories, her very essence were intertwined with his. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. "Focus, Ethan," Kayla said, her voice resonating in his thoughts. "Let the bond guide you." He closed his eyes, trying to focus. The energy around them swirled, building in intensity. The devourers outside the temple let out a collective roar, their forms pressing against the walls as they tried to break through. "They're getting stronger," Ethan said, panic creeping into his voice. "So are we," Kayla replied. "Trust the bond." The energy reached a crescendo, and the platform began to glow brighter. The patterns beneath their feet shifted, forming a spiral that seemed to stretch into infinity. Ethan felt his body grow lighter, as if he were being pulled into the very fabric of the universe. And then it happened. The final confrontation. The bond surged to life, its energy exploding outward in a brilliant wave. Ethan and Kayla were no longer two separate beings. They were one, their minds and souls intertwined. The chamber pulsed with light, and the walls of the temple shuddered as the devourers breached its outer defenses. But something had changed. Ethan raised his hand, and the mark on his palm blazed with golden light. The devourers recoiled, their dark forms disintegrating as the energy washed over them. Kayla joined him, her presence a steady flame in his mind. "We can do this," she said. "Together." They stepped off the platform, the energy of the bond radiating around them. The devourers surged forward, a tidal wave of darkness, but Ethan and Kayla stood firm. With a single thought, they unleashed the full power of the bond, a blinding pulse of light that tore through the creatures. The devourers let out a final, piercing scream before dissolving into nothingness. The chamber fell silent, the energy around them fading to a gentle hum. Ethan collapsed to his knees, his chest heaving. Kayla knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's done," she said softly. He looked at her, exhaustion etched into his features. "Is it over?" "For now," Kayla said. "But the hive mind is still out there. This was just the first step." Ethan nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Then we'll take the next one. Together." Kayla smiled back, her violet eyes glowing faintly. "Together." As they left the temple, the first rays of light broke through the darkened sky, illuminating the ruins of Kayla's world. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a chance to rebuild, to fight back, to defy the darkness. And for the first time, Ethan felt hope.